My name is Madeline Carter. In my mother's kitchen, my younger brother slammed my face into the edge of the fridge, then drove his knee into my nose so hard it broke and bled. As I stumbled, reaching for my phone to call for help, my mother snatched it out of my hand and said coldly, "It's just a scratch. Don't be dramatic." My stepfather sat a few feet away, never looking up, just muttering, "There she goes again, putting on a show." That night, I walked out of the house I had called home for 30 years, blood on my shirt, a broken leather bracelet in my pocket, and a truth pressing down on my chest that I had tried so hard to deny. I was never really loved in that house. Have you ever been hurt by your own family only to be told you were too sensitive? If you've ever been dismissed, ever been told you're too much, I hope you'll share your story in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe so I can tell you the rest of this journey, where I finally stood up and never looked back. I drove in silence, my left hand gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The streetlights smeared across the windshield, each flash of light blending with my heavy breathing. Blood still trickled near my collar, soaking through the cloth I pressed against my face. I didn't stop. I didn't cry. The pain in my nose had started to crawl up toward my temples, but the sharpest sting was that strange, dull ache of not being surprised. I knew the way home without looking. I lived in a temporary third-floor apartment near the hospital where I worked. It wasn't warm, it wasn't colorful, but it was quiet. No slamming doors, no plates smashing mid-dinner. I stepped inside, took off my coat, and tossed it onto the shadowed chair in the corner. A dark streak of blood spread across the gray fabric. I didn't turn on the main lights. I went straight to the bathroom and switched on the dim bulb above the mirror. As the light came on, I had to brace myself against the sink just to stay upright. My face in the mirror looked warped. The bruise under my left eye from an argument with my mom 2 weeks ago hadn't faded, now nearly hidden by dried blood. My nose was swollen and purple, clearly bent. My lip was split. My shirt had 3 large bloodstains, one from my nose, 2 I couldn't even identify. I unwrapped the cloth, wet it under cold water, and tried to wipe the blood from my skin. The water didn't soothe. It only made me more alert, just enough to stop myself from collapsing. I opened the cabinet, pulled out the first aid kit, dug through for gauze and antiseptic, then sat on the bathroom floor. My hands trembled. My mind was blank. No texts from my sister, no calls checking in, no apology from the person who'd crushed my face like snapping an empty plastic bottle. Everything was silent, like it had never happened at all. Once I'd bandaged myself as best I could, I stood up and went to the living room. I turned on the small lamp next to the sofa and reached into the bottom cabinet where a clear plastic box had sat untouched for years. I slid it out. The dust on the lid had thickened over time. I opened it, layer by layer. The first letter I pulled out was from 6th grade. The pencil was smudged. "Miss Madeline, thank you for helping me when I fell on the stairs. I was really scared." A shaky line, written by a 1st-grade girl I had once helped as a school volunteer. I kept it because it was one of the rare times someone had seen me as a helper. Beneath it was a stack of medical records. I flipped through each one. Age 8, impact on lower back, possible fall downstairs. Age 10, bruising under left eye. Age 12, sprained wrist, suspected sports injury. But I'd never played sports. I had told the doctor I slipped, because my mother was standing right behind me, arms crossed, eyes cold. I kept digging. A photo from New Year's when I was 14. The whole family wore red, gathered in front of the Christmas tree. I wasn't in it, not because I hadn't been there. I remembered clearly sitting at the dinner table that night, leg throbbing after Liam kicked me in the back when I ran past, but in the photo I was gone, cropped out. The right edge had a jagged cut, like someone had used dull scissors. I set it aside and turned the page. Another album. My 16th birthday. I'd baked the cake myself. My mother said it should be small, don't overdo it. In the album, 2 pictures, candles, cake, balloons. In both, my face was either turned away or blocked by a raised hand. That hand belonged to Liam. I remembered. He'd thrown a balloon at my face just as I was about to blow out the candles. I froze when I saw a small folded paper. A psychological assessment? I was 17. The doctor wrote, "Patient displays mild anxiety, low self-esteem, easily affected by family environment." I had brought that form to school to request extra time for exams. My mother tore it in half when I got home. The piece I had now was a copy I'd managed to hide. I laid each item on the table in chronological order. Reports, letters, photos, diagnosis slips. Then I sat quietly. Cuts, bruises, nights spent in closets, dinners where I held my breath so I wouldn't be noticed. Each memory stitched together like a map of a life where I was always told I was just being dramatic. I picked up my phone, scrolled through the call log. Not one from my mother, not a single text from anyone in the family, as if they were still finishing their dinner, watching the last few minutes of a football game, pretending I'd never existed in that house. I leaned back on the sofa, arms limp at my sides, staring at the ceiling. After a while, I sat up, opened the box again, and pulled out the small leather cord bracelet, given to me by a woman named Margie, a patient I cared for during her final days at the hospital. The bracelet still had dried blood on it. I wiped it gently, then placed it on the table, right in the center of the documents. The room suddenly felt too wide. No footsteps, no shouting, no one telling me I was imagining things. But this quiet wasn't comforting. It felt like snow covering the grave of a child no one ever named. I leaned down, pulled out a sheet of paper, and wrote the first line. "I've been called a liar, but this is what really happened." And then my hand kept writing. And writing. I'll never forget that basement. Cold, dark, and thick with the smell of damp earth and something old, like burnt paper. There were no windows. When the light went off, the space ahead felt strangled, dense, and dead silent. I was locked in there one night when I was 10 for causing trouble over something small. I didn't want to give Liam a notebook with a horse on the cover that I'd just gotten for my birthday. My mother didn't yell. She didn't scream like the women in movies. She just stood there, pointed at the basement door, and said evenly, "Go down there. Stay until you learn how to behave like a normal person." Then the door closed. No padlock, just a wooden latch on the outside. But to me, it felt like the gates of a world I could never return from. I sat curled in a corner, hugging my knees, too scared to close my eyes. At first, I screamed, then cried, then whispered. Finally, I went quiet. A silence that stretched on for years, like if I said less, did less, I might be hurt. When I told the school counselor about this at 16, he asked why I didn't call anyone for help. I laughed. Back then, I didn't think I needed to be saved. I thought I deserved the punishment. My mom always said every problem in the house started with me. I believed her. That night, after writing the first few lines in the file I titled Documentation Witness Level 1, I opened my laptop. I started logging each incident. Time, place, who was there, what happened, how I felt, what was said. My hands still shook as I typed, not from fear, but because I had never spoken these things aloud, never dared write them down. And now, each sentence surfaced like I was digging up my own memory from a frozen place someone had tried to bury. I wrote about the broken pen and how my mom slapped me for destroying things. Wrote about my stepfather yelling I was filthy when I forgot to take out the trash. Wrote about my sister Jenna not speaking to me for all of 9th grade because I cried during a family gathering when Reed pulled my hair in front of everyone. These things had once seemed small, but when laid out in order, they weren't small at all. They were a pattern, a cycle. The next morning, I went to the hospital to get my injuries checked. The doctor was someone I knew, a woman in her 50s, solid build, voice calm but firm, not cold. When she pulled down my mask, her eyes paused for a moment. She lifted my chin with such gentleness it made my throat tighten. Was it a direct hit? She asked. I nodded. Need a face. She didn't write it down immediately. She looked at me for a long time, then finally said, This is serious. If we don't realign your nose right away, the bone will shift permanently. I just nodded. She recommended imaging. I stayed silent. Lying in the ultrasound room, I stared at the ceiling and thought about the first time I needed stitches after falling in the kitchen. The doctor back then asked what happened. I said I slipped while washing dishes. The truth? I was shoved hard. Back in the exam room, the doctor placed a hand on my shoulder. I'm not a counselor, she said, but I've treated people with similar injuries. If you need help, I can refer you to somewhere safe. You don't have to go through this alone. I didn't respond. I just took the printed report, diagnosis, swelling index, follow-up recommendations, and left the room. Out in the hallway, I stood by the water fountain for a long time, never taking a sip. When I got home, I placed the paper on the table next to my documentation box. I grabbed my phone, created a new photo album, and took pictures of each document, labeling them by date. Then I opened my notes app and typed the title. Every time they said I was imagining it. And I kept writing, memory by memory. I saw myself at 12, gripping the bathroom doorframe, watching my stepfather kick Liam in the back for spilling milk. I felt relief, because for once, it wasn't me. But 5 minutes later, my mother walked in and saw me smiling faintly. She never asked why. She slapped me for enjoying someone else's pain. That night, I didn't eat dinner. I cried in the bathroom. Not from the sting, but from not knowing what I'd done wrong. I remembered when I was 15, the one time Jenna called me out of my room, just to hand me a bank form. She needed my signature to co-sign a student loan. I signed. No one said thank you. A month later, Mom called me a freeloader. Each memory felt like a thin blade. Not one that pierced the heart all at once, but one that scraped slowly along the skin until I couldn't feel anything. Writing now, it didn't hurt like it used to, but it made me go numb, like I was retelling the life of a girl I once knew, once lived with, once held inside my chest, and then forgot. I was that girl, and now I was bringing her back. That shift started like any other. The monitors beeped steadily in the ER, and the smell of antiseptic clung to every fold in my scrubs. I was labeling vials when I heard a soft knock in the hallway. A young nurse came over and touched my shoulder. Madeline, there's a little girl in the waiting room asking for you. She's alone. Says she knows your name. I frowned, wiped my hands quickly, and stepped outside. Ellie was curled up in a waiting chair, her legs too short to touch the floor, arms wrapped around a worn-out stuffed bear. When she saw me, she sprang up, her wide eyes filled with a mix of relief and fear. I knelt down, my voice low. You came here by yourself? She nodded, then stepped closer and whispered into my ear. I didn't want to go home. Last night, Uncle Liam banged on my door. I got scared. I hid under the bed. Then she said slowly, like each word was a forbidden secret. This morning, Aunt Evelyn told me to stop bothering people. She said, "You want to end up like little Madeline?" My throat closed. That sentence, it was a rusted dagger pulled straight from the past, now pressed into a new child's skin. I looked at Ellie's hands, still clutching the bear. Her right wrist showed a faint purple bruise just starting to turn. Not a fall, not an accident. The kind of mark I used to hide under sweatbands at school. I rested a hand gently on her knee and asked softly, "Does it hurt?" She didn't answer. She just turned her head away and slowly shook it. I led her into the staff break room, gave her a warm cup of milk and the last cookie from a Christmas gift tin someone had left out the day before. While she ate, I wrote up an internal incident report and called the local police. An hour later, a young officer arrived at the hospital. I walked him through everything. My observations of the bruise, Ellie's words, her family situation. Her mom, a single parent, was working out of state. Ellie had been left with her great-aunt Evelyn for a few weeks. The officer listened, took notes, then looked up with a polite but restrained expression. "Miss Madeline, I understand your concern, but without more direct evidence like video footage, clear photos of the act, or a second adult witness, it's hard for us to open a formal case. Right now, it's just suspicion." I wasn't surprised. That response was as familiar as breath. For years, I'd been met with disbelief, with doubtful eyes whenever I spoke up. But it wasn't about me. It was about Ellie, a 9-year-old girl trembling in the room where I worked every day. And I'd seen her eyes. They were the same as mine used to be, the way a child looks around and knows no one is on their side. I tried everything, recommended a full psychological assessment, contacted a trusted child therapist I knew, offered to stay in touch with the police. I even volunteered to be listed as a temporary guardian. But in the end, they only kept the preliminary report, returned Ellie to that same house, and said they'd follow up if anything new came up. I walked her to the patrol car. She said nothing, but just before the door closed, she looked back at me, lips tight, eyes glistening, as if begging me to do something she didn't know how to name. I stood there, watching the car disappear into the parking lot, my chest sinking like stone. I returned to the break room and resumed my shift like nothing had happened, but my hands shook as I filled out patient charts. In my head, all I could hear was my mother's voice, echoed in Ellie's whisper. "You want to end up like little Madeline?" I sat down, opened my laptop, and created a new file in my documentation folder. For the first time, it had someone else's name. Ellie Monroe, age 9. Initial observation, fearful, unexplained bruising, verbal account matches patterns of emotional abuse. Caregiver behavior, dismissive, suggested child resembles previously marginalized family member. I didn't know what else I could do, but I knew if I kept staying silent, I wouldn't be able to forgive myself. I couldn't sleep that night. Exhausted after a long shift, I lay in bed, eyes wide open, listening to the dry ticking of the wall clock. The nightlight was off, only the glow from the street filtered through the blinds, dull as a breath caught in the throat. In my mind, Ellie's face replayed over and over, the way she flinched when I touched her bruise, that silent, knowing look, deeper than words, like she'd already learned not to expect anyone to believe her. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed. No alarm, no hospital call, just an unfamiliar number from a vaguely familiar area code. I hesitated for a moment, then picked up. "Madeline?" A man's voice, deep, slightly hoarse. "It's Noah. Noah Green." I stayed quiet for a few seconds. That name shook loose a part of my memory buried under dust. 12th grade classmate. The only person who ever asked if I was okay after I walked into class one afternoon with a swollen lip and tear-streaked eyes. He once left me a medical textbook from the school library, tucked into my desk with a hastily scribbled note. "You don't have to go through it alone." "Noah?" I whispered, voice raspy. "Why are you calling?" "I'm sorry it's late, but I just brought Ellie back." His voice was urgent, more than just flustered. "She showed up in my yard, barefoot, thin jacket, shaking like a leaf. She said she didn't want to stay there anymore. She didn't want to become another Madeline." I shot upright in bed, blanket falling to the floor. That sentence ripped through the night like lightning. I swallowed hard. "How is she now?" "She's asleep. I've got her in our guest room, locked inside and out with a security camera. My wife's a child psychologist. She's with her now. She's safe, but I thought you should know." I nodded, forgetting he couldn't see me, then murmured, "Thank you." "Madeline," he hesitated. "I never said this before, but I remember the day you were shoved in the hallway, hit your head on the filing cabinet. They said you tripped. But I saw Liam nearby. I saw Jenna laugh." I closed my eyes. A chill crept down my spine, not from fear, but from memory finally being called by name. "I remember, too." "I was a coward," Noah said. "I should have spoken up, but I was scared. They were respected, powerful, and I was just a kid who didn't want his mom dragged into neighbor drama. I stayed silent for 20 years. I rested my forehead on my knees, voice barely a breath. "We were all taught to look the other way, Noah," he sighed. "Not this time. I've worked as a child advocacy attorney for 8 years now. I know the loopholes, but I also know how to close them. If you'll let me, I'll file for emergency guardianship of Ellie on your behalf. And in parallel, we can build a case against Evelyn and Liam for endangering a minor. I didn't answer right away. Something stirred in me. Not rage, not quite pain. A feeling of someone standing beside me. Someone who saw. Someone who had once stayed silent, but was now speaking. For another child. I've got documentation, I said slowly. Photos, medical reports, a handwritten journal, even a video clip from when I was 16. Liam shattered a porcelain plate against my shoulder, right in front of the living room's security camera. I backed it up. That file still exists. Good, Noah responded immediately. We'll use everything. But most important is Ellie's statement. If she's willing, I'll schedule an initial evaluation with an independent specialist. I could hear my heartbeat. Steady, solid. I didn't feel like I was running from a storm. I felt like I was turning to face it. I closed my eyes and nodded into the dark. Let's do it, Noah. I'm not letting this happen again. That evening, Ellie sat curled up on my couch, wrapped in the gray fleece blanket I always used after hospital shifts. She had barely spoken after dinner, nodding when I offered food, keeping her words tucked inside. But when I finished clearing the dishes and turned back toward her, she finally spoke, softly, like she was afraid to wake someone. My mother again. Were you ever locked in the basement? I froze mid-step, my heart clenched. I nodded, slowly. Yes, I was. A long time ago. Ellie looked down, twisting the edge of the blanket between her fingers. Me too. 2 weeks ago. Uncle Liam said I was being too loud, so I had to go down there to think. She hesitated, then pushed forward like it was something forbidden she had to say. He locked me behind an iron door at the end of the basement. It's not like a normal door. It locks from the outside, and it's really dark. I cried, but nobody heard. I sat beside her, careful not to reach out. What did you see inside? Nothing. Just gray walls, no light. I sat until I fell asleep. When I woke up, someone unlocked it. It was Aunt Evelyn. She said, if I didn't behave, I'd turn into a bad person. And that room is for bad people. I felt the blood in my body turn cold. That phrase, for bad people. My mother had said the exact same thing to me in that same room. I'd thought I was the only one ever locked behind that door. Now I knew it wasn't just my past. It was a tool. A punishment reused. A system of silence. I stood and pulled a printed copy of my journal notes from the drawer. In it, I had once sketched a layout of the basement. That door. I had marked its position. I'd even recorded details about the steel frame, the external padlock, and the cold metallic smell when I leaned against the wall. The next morning, I walked into the county sheriff's office carrying my notes, old photos of the scene, Ellie's statement, and an initial report from the psychologist currently working with her. I asked to speak with Sheriff Daniels, the same man I'd once worked with at the community clinic 3 years back. Sheriff Daniels came out, looking worn but not dismissive. When I handed him the file, he read for a long time. No interruptions, no skepticism. When he finally looked up, there was thoughtfulness in his expression. You're saying this room may have existed for at least 15 years? I was locked in there the first time at age 10, and Ellie was locked in 2 weeks ago. He nodded, closed the file. We'll request a search warrant. But if what you're saying is accurate, this isn't just a family matter anymore. This could be unlawful confinement of a minor, and potentially a serious criminal charge. The warrant was approved the very next day. I wasn't present for the search, but Sheriff Daniels called me afterward. His voice was steady, low, not dramatic, but every word hit me square in the chest. We found the iron door. It leads to a sealed room, no windows, no power. There's an old camera mounted on the wall, not functioning, but still wired in. We found signs that someone had been inside, scratches on the cement floor, and a broken child's hanger. I sank to the floor, back against my bookshelf. The world around me went blurry, like a thin layer of fog had settled over everything. I thought I'd feel satisfaction, maybe relief, But what rose in me was a tidal wave of grief. For years, I'd asked myself if I had imagined it, if I'd been too sensitive. Now, everything stood plain, cold, and undeniable. That room was real. It once held me, and now it had held Ellie. And if I hadn't acted, who knows how many more names there might have been. More children, more adults with bruises no one could see. The invitation came through someone I knew. No apology, no admission, just a short message from my mother. The family needs to talk. It's time to put misunderstandings behind us. Come to dinner. One meal, as if the bruises I carried for 30 years could be erased with a few dishes on the table. I arrived on time, not early, not late. In my hand was a bundle of lavender carefully wrapped in brown paper, its light scent a quiet warning, dressed as gentleness. In my bag, a flash drive, securely wrapped, along with a printed legal certification verifying the source of a basement camera recording from 1999. It was evidence I had spent weeks retrieving from an old backup archive that my stepfather never thought anyone could access. My mother greeted me with a controlled smile, her lips curved but never moved. "You're here. Good. Pretty flowers. Lavender's always been your favorite, hasn't it?" I nodded, setting the bouquet on the side table near the window. I didn't say that I had stopped liking that scent when I was 12, after she filled my room with lavender oil every night I woke up crying, telling me to go back to sleep instead of messing up the household mood. The dining room looked like a staged performance. White tablecloth, polished silverware, scented candles burning low, the main course just brought out of the oven. Jenna sat to my mother's right. Liam was across the table, expression calm, like nothing had ever happened. My chair was placed right by the door, easy to enter, easy to exit, the perfect spot for someone on the edge. I sat down, not touching my water glass. The meal began with small talk. My mother asked about work, Jenna bragged about her son winning a sports scholarship. My stepfather sipped red wine without looking at me. I stayed silent, one hand resting on my purse. When my mother began slicing the cake, I unzipped my bag, pulled out a pocket projector and a USB drive. No one noticed at first, but when I turned the projector on, light spilled onto the far wall. The room dimmed for a moment, then an image flickered. Grainy, faint, but unmistakable. A small girl with tangled hair curled up in a corner. Shaky breathing echoed from the tiny speaker. A heavy iron door slammed shut behind her. Then came the scream. Not a violent scream, just a choked, gasping cry from a child learning how to despair in silence. "What is this?" Jenna's voice rose. I didn't answer, I just watched the screen. At the 26-second mark, footsteps echoed. A man appeared briefly. Face unclear, but the silhouette and gait so painfully familiar. He locked the door from the outside, then turned and walked away. The screen darkened. I shut off the projector. Silence filled the room like a thick blanket draped over something that had just died. My stepfather leapt to his feet, knocking over his chair. "Where did you get that?" He stormed toward me, hand raised to snatch the device. I didn't flinch. I didn't have to. A knock at the door. A firm voice from the hallway. "Addison County Police. We have a search warrant." My mother went pale. Jenna whispered, "What is happening?" Liam sat frozen, face flushed. "Mr. Frank Sullivan, we are authorized to search the entire basement and all digital storage devices on this property based on evidence of unlawful confinement of a minor over an extended period." I sat still, the projector still in my hand. The image of that little girl had faded from the wall, but the sound lingered in my mind. Dinner remained on the table, untouched. The scented candles now clashed with the smell of cooling roast meat. That's when I realized they were used to no one ever coming. They thought I wouldn't dare. But I had come, not alone, not silent, and this time, no doors would be locked from the outside. That morning in court smelled of old paper and cold air conditioning. I sat on the witness stand, eyes fixed on the podium across the room where my mother stood. Petite, but still carrying the same composed presence she always had. She wore her usual pearl gray dress, hair neatly pinned, voice sharp and steady like a sewing needle. "She's always been like this," she said, never looking at me. "Craving attention, always making a scene just so someone would care." Each word she spoke dragged me backward through time, to every moment I cried in the dark, every time I was locked in that room and heard the sound of the bolt clicking shut from the other side. I didn't speak. I just watched. The prosecutor presented the evidence clearly. The projector replayed the basement video, photos of injuries, hospital records from when I was still a student. Then came the witnesses. First was Mrs. Townsend, our neighbor of nearly 20 years. She stepped up, clutching her purse like it might steady her nerves. "I used to hear Madeline crying at night," she said. "At first I thought it was nightmares, but then she started disappearing from the backyard for days. They said she was at tutoring. I never saw a car." Next was Dr. Hall, the doctor who stitched my knee when I was 12. He stepped up, hand on the stand, looking straight at the judge. "She came to my clinic 3 times in 1 year. Each time the story was a fall, but the bruises didn't match. The injuries didn't line up. I filed a report with child welfare, never heard back." Then came Ms. Barrett, my 3rd-grade teacher, her voice still soft, like when she used to read stories aloud every Monday morning. She presented a faded envelope, inside a copy of a letter she had sent to the principal nearly 25 years ago. "In this letter, I expressed concern about Madeline's condition," she said. "I saw bruises on her wrist. I saw how she flinched when someone raised their voice. I urged the school to intervene, but afterward her stepfather called me, threatened to sue for defamation. The principal said there wasn't enough proof. My letter was buried." The courtroom was silent. I looked around. Some familiar faces. People who once sat beside my mother at PTA meetings. People who had shaken my stepfather's hand at charity dinners. Now their eyes held doubt, stillness. One man sitting behind me whispered to his friend, "Did this really go on all those years?" No one replied. By the second hearing, local news outlets had picked up the story. A blurry, grainy image of me, at age 8, curled in the corner of a dark room, appeared on the front page of the Green Hill Gazette. The headline read in bold, "Behind the Iron Door, the chilling secret of Green Hill's most admired family." I didn't feel triumphant. I felt exhausted. Every court date was another retelling, another reliving. My mother's gaze never changed, cold, unwavering. Sometimes she bowed her head slightly, as if wearied by the ongoing accusations. When asked about the basement door, she replied smoothly, "I wasn't involved in any renovations downstairs. That was my husband's domain." Asked about the bruises on Ellie's arm, she said, "Kids play rough, probably bumped into something. That's just how children are." But the public wasn't quiet anymore. After one hearing, I got a message from the old school librarian, the one forced into early retirement for disrupting internal policy after shelving books on childhood trauma in the kids section. She wrote, "I always believed you. They just never gave me the chance to say so. A woman I didn't remember. Someone who used to be friends with Jenna. Emailed me. I'm sorry I laughed when your mom scolded you in front of everyone at the class party. I thought it was just family stuff. Now I know surviving what you did is nothing short of a miracle." Each message felt like a gentle knock on a door I'd lived behind for years. And now that door was cracking open, not because I screamed, but because, finally, people were listening. The verdict came with a dry gavel strike echoing through the courtroom. I sat, hands folded over my knees. As the judge read the ruling, my eyes followed each word like I was stepping across a narrow bridge between 2 lives. I didn't cry. I just felt my chest loosen, slowly, like I was breathing clean air. I had been granted temporary guardianship of Ellie. She sat beside me, her small hand wrapped loosely around the hem of my coat, not tight, but unwilling to let go. As we walked out of the courtroom, avoiding camera flashes and curious stares, Ellie paused at the exit, turned, and looked at me. Her eyes no longer filled with fear, but something still tender, cautious, fragile. "Aunt Madeline," she whispered, her voice nearly lost in the cold March wind. "They won't lock me up again, right?" I knelt down, meeting her eyes, and gently placed my hand over her tiny one. "No, nobody has the right to do that anymore. You're safe now." Ellie nodded without another word. She didn't cry. There was no dramatic embrace like in the movies, just the quiet of a child who had lived with fear for so long that being told she was finally safe didn't immediately feel true. I had been there too. I hadn't forgotten. That afternoon, I took Ellie to a small pottery shop near the park. Soft golden sunlight streamed through the window, touching rows of neatly arranged cups in all colors. Ellie moved slowly, her hand brushing each cup as if touching something sacred. When she paused before a small white porcelain cup, decorated around the rim with tiny blue baby's breath flowers, I saw the corner of her mouth gently lift. "This one's so pretty." She glanced up at me, then back at the cup. "Would you like to take it home?" I asked softly. She nodded slightly without saying a word. I wrapped the cup carefully in soft paper, placed it into a small box, and wrote gently on the lid, "Ellie's cup. Do not touch without permission." That evening back at home, I opened the wooden cabinet in the living room and pulled out my old cup. Ivory porcelain with a chipped rim and a long crack down its side, like a fracture running through memory. I'd kept it for more than 10 years. I'd almost thrown it away, but never could. It was a part of my history, something I needed as a reminder of how far I'd come. I placed Ellie's new cup next to mine. Clean, perfect, without a scratch. The two cups sat side by side, one broken, one whole, like two parts of a story that had never been fully told. Late that night, after Ellie had fallen asleep, I sat in the kitchen with Noah. He poured me a cup of tea while holding a thin folder in his other hand. "I've finished drafting the permanent no-contact order," Noah said, keeping his voice low so as not to wake Ellie. "It forbids any form of communication, calls, letters, direct or indirect contact, even through third parties. Any violation will lead to criminal charges. I'll submit it to the court first thing tomorrow." I took the document, my eyes scanning each line. Each word felt like a small fence built between myself and those who had caused so much hurt in the name of family. I looked up. "Do you think they'll try to find loopholes?" Noah shook his head. "Not this time. Not with what you've documented, especially now that Ellie isn't alone." I nodded. A part of me was still wary, still afraid that someday someone might knock on the door with those old voices. But another part, the part I was slowly learning to trust, knew that I wouldn't face it alone. More importantly, I was protecting myself anymore. I was protecting a child who deserved to grow up without the invisible scars I had once carried. The conference hall that day wasn't large, just enough space for a few hundred people, doctors, nurses, social workers, professionals from public health systems around the state. I sat in the third row, gripping the speech draft tightly, watching each speaker take the stage. They spoke about budget shortages, overcrowded mental health wards, children sent home before adequate evaluation. Then my name was called. Madeline Carter, head nurse at Addison Hospital, founder of the Witness Safe Circle support group, presenting When Silence Hurts. I stood up, my palms cold despite the heated auditorium. Approaching the podium, I didn't look up at the audience right away. Instead, I glanced at the small photo tucked in my jacket pocket. Ellie and me, taken at the park last month. Her smile was no longer timid like when we first met. That was all I needed to begin. I shared my story not as a victim, nor as a victor. I spoke quietly, calmly, as though sitting in an old kitchen, making tea, and voicing truths I had been forced to forget. I spoke about the basement, about the iron door, about being cut out of family photos, about how silence can become the main language within a home. I talked about Ellie, about the time she asked me in a whisper, Will they lock me up again? And about the moment I realized the fear I'd carried for decades finally had a shape, a name, and I could face it without trembling. When I reached the final lines, I clicked to the last slide of my presentation. The screen displayed two cups placed side by side, one white porcelain cup with a crack running down its side, and a brand new cup decorated with tiny blue baby's breath flowers along the rim. Between them was a handwritten sentence I'd scanned. This is what breaking the cycle looks like. I didn't say anything else. I simply let the image speak, quietly but clearly. The auditorium remained silent for a moment. Then one person stood. Then another. Then an entire row. Applause echoed softly, sincerely, not loud or impulsive, like the gentle nod of people who had heard hundreds of stories, yet still found themselves moved again. That evening, when I got home, Ellie was sitting at the small desk in the living room corner. She didn't hear me open the door. Her head remained bowed as she carefully colored. I hung up my coat and stepped closer. On the desk lay a simple crayon drawing. Childish yet enough to make my heart tighten. Two figures stood beneath a house holding hands. A woman with curly hair and a long coat, and a little girl with her hair tied slightly off-center. Above them, scribbled in purple crayon, were the words, Aunt Maddie and me, safe now. I sat down next to her. Ellie said nothing, just handed me the drawing with both hands. I took it and held it to my chest. No one ever taught me how to be a guardian, but in that moment, I knew I was doing the right thing. Not just to fix what had broken in the past, but to build something that wouldn't need mending in the future. A true shelter. A real home. A life with no locks on the outside of the door. If you're still here, thank you for listening, not just with your ears, but with the empathy I'd longed for all these years. I didn't share this for pity. I shared it because I believe each of us has something hidden away, a locked door, an unseen scar. I was once a child told to stay silent. Now, I'm the woman who's learned how to listen when another child doesn't know how to speak. And you, what do you think about this story? About Ellie, the cracked cup, and how we can protect someone simply by believing they deserve kindness. If something in your life has ever kept you silent, I hope today you can start calling it by name. And if you'd like to continue this journey with me, with Ellie, and with more quiet, truthful stories about healing, family, and how cracks can become places for light to enter, please subscribe to this channel. Because what we share here might sometimes be the last thread holding someone to hope.